The air crackled with tension as I gripped Caleb's hand, my pulse racing like a drumbeat in my chest. The Chicago park buzzed with life. Kids shrieking on swings, joggers weaving through paths, vendors hawking hot dogs. But all I could see were the two cops striding toward us, their faces hard as stone. I'd lived 28 years as a black man in America. I knew that look, and it screamed trouble. "Sir, step aside," the taller officer barked, his hand hovering near his holster. His partner, shorter but no less intimidating, eyed Caleb like he was sizing up a threat. Caleb's fingers tightened around mine, steady and warm, but I felt the tremor in his grip. We'd been here before in smaller ways. Stares, whispers, the occasional slur hissed from a passing car, but never like this. Never with badges and guns. "Problem, officers?" Caleb's voice was calm, almost too calm, like the eye of a storm. At 30, he had a way of carrying himself, confident, unyielding, that made people pause. But these cops didn't. The taller one, Officer Daniels, according to his nameplate, stepped closer, his eyes narrowing on me. "We got a call about a disturbance," Daniels said, his tone clipped. "You two were reported for public behavior." My stomach twisted. Public behavior. Two men holding hands in a park at dusk, laughing over a shared coffee, was a disturbance? I wanted to laugh, to scream, to run. Instead, I stood frozen, Caleb's hand anchoring me to the earth. "What behavior?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "We're just walking." Daniel's partner, Officer Ruiz, snorted. "Don't play dumb. We've got witnesses saying you were causing a scene." "A scene?" Caleb's laugh was bitter, cutting through the evening air. "We were holding hands. If that's a crime, half this park should be in cuffs." The officers exchanged a glance, the kind that said they'd already made up their minds. My heart pounded harder. I'd seen this script play out on the news, in my neighborhood growing up in Atlanta, in the stories my mom told me late at night about staying safe. Be polite. Don't argue. Keep your hands visible. But Caleb wasn't backing down, and I loved him for it as much as it terrified me. "ID, both of you," Daniels ordered, his hand now resting on his radio. I fumbled for my wallet, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. Caleb, though, moved slower, deliberate, his hazel eyes locked on Daniel's like he was reading his soul. "Before we do that," Caleb said, "mind telling us what law we're breaking?" Ruiz stepped forward, his jaw tight. "You're getting real close to resisting, pal. Hand over the ID now." The park seemed to fade away, the sounds of laughter and chatter drowned out by the blood rushing in my ears. I handed over my driver's license, Jaden Carter, 28, address in Logan Square. Caleb still hadn't moved, his posture rigid but not aggressive. I shot him a look, pleading silently. "Don't push this. Not here. Not now." But Caleb wasn't like me. He didn't shrink under pressure. He'd grown up in a small town in Wisconsin, where being the only openly gay kid in school meant learning to stand tall early. He told me stories of fistfights and late-night drives to escape his dad's rage. He wasn't afraid of these cops, and it both awed and scared me. "Last chance," Daniel said, his voice low, dangerous. "ID or we're taking you in." Caleb's lips curved into a small, defiant smile. He reached into his jacket, and my breath caught, fearing he'd pull something reckless. Instead, he drew out a slim leather wallet, flipped it open, and held up a gleaming badge. "Caleb Whitaker, Chicago PD, Detective First Grade," he said, his voice steady as steel. "And this is my fiancée, Jaden." Care to explain why you're harassing us? The air shifted, like the moment before lightning strikes. Daniel's face froze, his eyes darting between the badge and me. Ruiz's hand dropped from his radio, his bravado evaporating. I felt Caleb's grip on my hand loosen, but he didn't let go. Not once. Your fiancé? Daniels repeated, the word stumbling out like it was foreign. His gaze flicked to our joined hands, then back to Caleb's badge, as if trying to reconcile the two. Yeah, Caleb said, his voice softening but no less firm. My fiancé. So unless you've got an actual crime to report, I suggest you back off. The silence that followed was deafening. Ruiz muttered something under his breath, stepping back. Daniel's jaw worked, but he didn't speak. The park came back into focus. Kids still playing, the sun dipping below the skyline, painting the trees gold. But I couldn't shake the weight of their stares, the way they'd looked at us like we were something to be fixed. Let's go, Jaden, Caleb said, tugging me gently. I followed, my legs unsteady, his badge still glinting in my mind's eye. We walked past the officers, their eyes burning holes in our backs, and I wondered how many others had faced this moment without a badge to save them. As we left the park, Caleb's hand never left mine, but the warmth of his touch couldn't erase the chill settling in my bones. This wasn't over. Not the stares, not the fear, not the fight. And yet, with Caleb beside me, I felt something stronger than fear. A stubborn, burning hope. We didn't speak until we reached our apartment in Logan Square, the door clicking shut behind us like a barrier against the world. The living room was warm, cluttered with books and half-finished coffee mugs, a stark contrast to the cold hostility of the park. Caleb tossed his jacket over a chair, his badge clattering onto the table, and turned to me, his hazel eyes searching. You okay, Jaden? His voice was soft now, stripped of the steel he'd used with the cops. I sank onto the couch, my hands still trembling. No, I admitted. I'm not. He sat beside me, close enough that our knees touched. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to escalate things back there. I shook my head. You didn't. They did. My voice cracked, and I hated it. I'd spent my life learning to keep my emotions in check, to not give anyone a reason to see me as weak. Growing up in Atlanta, I'd navigated a world where being black meant always being on guard. Adding gay to that equation felt like carrying a second target on my back. Caleb reached for my hand, his thumb tracing circles over my knuckles. I should have just shown the badge sooner. I hate that we have to justify ourselves, that we can't just exist. I looked at him, at the faint scar above his eyebrow from a high school fight, at the way his jaw clenched when he was angry but trying not to show it. Caleb was white, and though he'd faced his own battles, his dad disowning him at 17, the whispers in the precinct when he came out, he didn't carry the same weight I did. He could walk into a room and not feel every eye judging him before he spoke. But he loved me fiercely, and that love made him fight battles that weren't his. I thought they were going to arrest us, I said quietly. Or worse. Caleb's face darkened. I wouldn't let that happen. You can't always stop it, I snapped, then regretted it. His hand stilled on mine and I sighed. I'm sorry. It's just I've seen what happens when things go wrong. My cousin, Malik, got jumped 2 years ago for less than holding hands. He's still got scars. Caleb nodded, his expression heavy. I know, and I hate that you have to carry that fear. That we both do in different ways. We sat in silence, the weight of the day pressing down. I thought about the park, the officers' faces, the way they'd looked at us like we were a problem to be solved. I thought about the word, fiancé, how it had rolled off Caleb's tongue like a shield, and how it hadn't been enough to erase the humiliation. "Let's eat," Caleb said finally, standing. "I'll make that pasta you like." I managed a small smile. "You mean the one you burn half the time?" He grinned, the tension easing slightly. "I'm getting better, swear." As he moved to the kitchen, I watched him, this man who'd chosen me despite everything. We'd met 2 years ago at a community art event in Pilsen, where I was showcasing my photography. He'd lingered by my display, asking questions about my shots of Chicago's South Side, his curiosity genuine. I'd been guarded, used to people seeing my work as exotic or gritty, but Caleb saw the beauty in it the same way he saw beauty in me. Dinner was quiet, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. Afterward, we curled up on the couch, a movie playing in the background that neither of us watched. My mind kept drifting to the park, to the officers' voices, to the way Caleb's badge had changed everything. And yet it hadn't. Not really. "I want to do something," I said suddenly, breaking the silence. Caleb turned to me, one eyebrow raised. "Like what?" "I don't know. Something to make this less heavy. To make it mean something." He studied me, then nodded slowly. "Okay, let's figure it out. Together." The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and Caleb's voice on the phone, low and urgent. He was in the kitchen, pacing, his badge clipped to his belt like a talisman. "Yeah, Captain, I get it," he was saying. "But this isn't just about me. It's about policy. It's about training." I froze, realization dawning. He was talking about the park, about us. I stepped into the kitchen, and he glanced at me, his expression a mix of determination and worry. He hung up, setting the phone down with a sigh. "What was that?" I asked. "I reported it," he said simply. "Filed a formal complaint about Daniels and Ruiz. They need to be held accountable." My chest tightened. "Caleb, you're a cop. You know how this works. They'll close ranks." "Maybe," he admitted. "But I'm not just a cop. I'm your fiancé, and I'm done letting this slide." His words hit me like a wave, warm and overwhelming. I crossed the room, wrapping my arms around him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. For the first time since the park, I felt like we could fight this, not just for us, but for everyone else who'd ever been made to feel small. The precinct was a fortress of gray concrete and flickering fluorescent lights, a place Caleb navigated with ease, but where I felt like an intruder. We sat in a cramped meeting room, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee. Across from us was Captain Gwyn, a wiry woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Caleb's complaint had been escalated, but I wasn't naive enough to think this would be easy. "Detective Whitaker," Gwyn began, her voice measured, "you're alleging officers Daniels and Ruiz acted with bias in their interaction with you and Mr. Carter. That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," Caleb said, leaning forward. "It's a fact. They targeted us for holding hands, Captain. No crime, no disturbance. Just 2 men in a park." Nguyen's gaze flicked to me, and I fought the urge to shrink under it. "Mr. Carter, can you corroborate this?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "Yes, they approached us, said they had a call about a disturbance. When we asked what we'd done, they got aggressive, demanded our IDs, acted like we were criminals." Nguyen scribbled something on a notepad, her face unreadable. "And you, detective, chose to reveal your badge instead of complying immediately. Why?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Because I shouldn't have to. We weren't breaking any laws. They had no grounds to stop us." The room fell silent, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound. I could feel Nguyen weighing her words, her position. She was Caleb's boss, but she was also part of a system that didn't always bend toward justice. "I'll review the body cam footage," she said finally, "and I'll speak to Daniels and Ruiz. But you both need to understand, this department doesn't take kindly to internal complaints. There could be pushback." "I'm ready for it," Caleb said, his voice steady. I wasn't so sure I was. We left the precinct, the weight of the meeting clinging to us like damp clothes. Outside, the Chicago wind whipped through the streets, carrying the scent of Lake Michigan. Caleb took my hand, and for a moment, I flinched, the park incident still raw. He noticed his grip loosening. "You don't have to hold on if it feels wrong," he said softly. I shook my head, tightening my fingers around his. "It doesn't. I just need time." He nodded, and we walked to a nearby cafe, a small place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. Over coffee, we talked about what came next. Caleb wanted to push for sensitivity training in the department, something mandatory, something real. I wanted to do more than complain. I wanted to tell our story, to make people see what we'd felt. "I could write about it," I said, the idea taking shape. "Or photograph it. A series, maybe. Show what it's like to be us, to be anyone who's ever been stopped for existing." Caleb's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant, Jaden. You've got the eye for it. Your work already speaks volumes." I smiled, the first real one in days. Photography had always been my way of making sense of the world, of capturing truth in a single frame. Maybe this was how we'd fight back. Not with fists or badges, but with art, with stories that couldn't be ignored. That night, I started sketching ideas for the series, my camera resting on the table like a partner in crime. Caleb sat across from me, scrolling through precinct policies on his laptop, looking for loopholes, for ways to make change from the inside. We were a team, each fighting in our own way, but together. The next day, I reached out to a friend, Aisha, who ran a local art gallery in Wicker Park. She was a 35-year-old Black woman with a knack for curating exhibits that sparked conversation. When I told her about the park, about the series I wanted to create, she didn't hesitate. "Jaden, this is it," she said, her voice crackling with excitement over the phone. "This is the kind of work that changes things. You've got my space, my support, everything." I hung up, my heart racing. For the first time since the park, I felt like I was taking back control, like I wasn't just a victim of someone else's prejudice. Caleb looked up from his laptop, sensing the shift in my mood. "Good news?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, grinning. "We're doing this." But even as hope bloomed, doubt lingered. The precinct wasn't going to change overnight, and neither was the world. I thought about the kids in the park, the ones who'd watched the cops approach us, the ones who might grow up thinking that love like ours was something to be policed. I wanted to change that, for them, for us, for everyone who'd ever felt the sting of being seen as less. The gallery hummed with anticipation, the walls lined with my photographs. Black and white shots of couples holding hands, laughing, living, juxtaposed with stark images of empty park benches, shadowed alleys, and the glint of a badge. The centerpiece was a portrait of Caleb and me, our hands clasped, our faces defiant yet tender, the Chicago skyline glowing behind us. On a nearby wall, a wooden panel bore the words, "Love is love" in red paint, echoing the park bench from that day. Aisha had outdone herself, turning the space into a haven of light and color, with soft jazz playing in the background. People milled about, their voices a low murmur as they studied my work. I stood near the back, Caleb at my side, his hand brushing mine. He was in his detective suit, badge clipped discreetly to his belt, but tonight he was just my fiancé, not a cop. "These are incredible, Jaden," he whispered, his eyes on the centerpiece. "You made us real." I swallowed the lump in my throat. That's the point. To show we're not just a disturbance. Aisha approached, her braids swinging as she grinned. "You've got a hit, Jaden. People are talking. I've already had 3 offers to buy the centerpiece." I blinked, stunned. "Buy it? I didn't think." "You should," she said. "This isn't just art. It's a movement." The night wore on, and I spoke to strangers who shared their own stories. Couples who'd faced harassment, parents who worried for their queer kids, even a retired cop who admitted the system needed to change. Each conversation felt like a brick in a foundation we were building, one story at a time. But not everyone was supportive. Halfway through the evening, a man in a suit, maybe 40, approached me, his expression tight. "This is provocative," he said, gesturing at the photos. "You're making cops look like the bad guys." I tensed, but Caleb stepped forward, his voice calm. "Some cops are. That's why we're here. To talk about it, to fix it." The man scoffed but didn't push further. As he walked away, I felt the weight of his words. Not everyone would understand, and some would fight us every step of the way. But the room was full of people who did, and that was enough for now. Back at the precinct, Caleb faced his own battles. Daniels and Ruiz had been reprimanded, but the fallout was subtle. Cold shoulders from colleagues, extra paperwork, shifts no one wanted. Caleb took it in stride, but I saw the toll it took, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought I wasn't looking. One night, after a long shift, he came home with a split lip, blood crusted on his chin. "What happened?" I demanded, grabbing a towel. "Training exercise," he said, but his eyes avoided mine. "Got a little rough." "Caleb," I said, my voice sharp, "don't lie to me." He sighed, sinking onto the couch. "It was Ruiz. We were sparring and he took it too far. Said some things." My blood boiled. "What things?" He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. I handled it." But it did matter. It mattered that Caleb was fighting a war on 2 fronts, for us, for the system he believed in. I wanted to protect him the way he'd protected me in the park, but I didn't know how. The next day, I poured my anger into my work, editing photos for a second exhibit. I focused on the small moments: 2 women laughing in a diner, a trans teen skateboarding with friends, images that showed joy in the face of struggle. Aisha loved them, and we planned a bigger show, one that would travel to other cities. Caleb, meanwhile, pushed for change at the precinct. He met with Nguyen again, presenting a proposal for mandatory bias training, backed by data from community groups. She listened, her face unreadable, but promised to take it to the higher-ups. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step. As winter settled over Chicago, we found a rhythm. My art, Caleb's advocacy, our love holding us together. But the city wasn't done testing us. One night, as we walked home from a late dinner, a group of guys shouted slurs from across the street, their voices sharp in the cold air. Caleb tensed, but I grabbed his arm. "Let it go," I said, my voice low. "They're not worth it." He looked at me, his eyes fierce, then nodded. We kept walking, hand in hand, refusing to let go. It wasn't defiance, not exactly. It was survival, a quiet act of resistance against a world that didn't always want us. Spring brought a thaw, not just in the weather but in our fight. The second exhibit launched in a larger gallery, drawing crowds from across Chicago and beyond. My photos were now paired with stories, quotes from the people I'd photographed, their words raw and honest. One image, of a young queer couple kissing under a streetlight, had the words "We are enough" painted on a nearby wall, bold and unapologetic. The night of the opening, Caleb stood beside me, his arm around my waist. The room buzzed with energy, with hope. Aisha introduced me to a journalist from a national outlet who wanted to feature the exhibit in a story about queer resilience. I felt like I was floating, like every moment of fear and anger had led to this. But the high didn't last. The next morning, Caleb got a call from Gwyn. The bias training proposal had been approved, but with a catch: Daniels and Ruiz were being transferred to another precinct, not fired. It was a compromise, a way to avoid a bigger fight. Caleb was furious, pacing our apartment like a caged animal. "It's not enough," he said, slamming his phone down. "They get to walk away, no consequences, while we're still dealing with the fallout." I sat on the couch watching him. "It's a start, Caleb. You got the training approved. That's huge." He shook his head. "It's a band-aid on a broken system." I stood, crossing to him, and took his face in my hands. "Listen to me. You're changing things. Maybe not all at once, but you are. And I'm so proud of you." His eyes softened, and he leaned into my touch. "I just want you to feel safe, Jaden. That's all I've ever wanted." "I do," I said, and for the first time I meant it, not because the world had changed, but because we had each other. The weeks that followed were a blur of interviews, gallery talks, and late-night planning sessions. My work was gaining traction, and Caleb was invited to speak at a community forum on police reform. We were making waves, but the bigger the waves, the more resistance we faced. Online, trolls flooded my social media with hate, calling my photos propaganda. Caleb's colleagues grew colder, some outright shunning him. One night, we went to a bar in Boys Town, needing a break. The music was loud, the crowd vibrant, but I noticed Caleb scanning the room, his cop instincts never fully off. I nudged him, grinning. "Dance with me." He laughed, shaking his head. "You know I'm terrible." "I don't care," I said, pulling him onto the dance floor. For a few minutes it was just us, moving to the beat, the world fading away. I kissed him, right there in the middle of the crowd, and for once no one cared. But the peace was fleeting. The next day, a brick was thrown through our apartment window, a note tied to it with a single word: "Fags." My heart stopped as Caleb read it aloud, his voice shaking with rage. He called it in, but the investigation went nowhere, no witnesses, no prints. Just another act of hate in a city that didn't always love us back. "We can't let this stop us," Caleb said, cleaning up the glass. "They want us scared. I'm not giving them that." I nodded, but fear gnawed at me. I thought about my cousin Malik, about the scars he carried, about all the people who didn't have a badge or a gallery to shield them. I poured that fear into my next project, a series of portraits of queer people who'd survived hate crimes, their faces fierce and unbroken. The night before the third exhibit, Caleb and I sat on our balcony, the city sprawling below us. He took my hand, his ring catching the moonlight. "We're getting married soon," he said, his voice soft. "No matter what happens, that's what matters." I smiled, leaning against him. "Yeah, that's what matters." Our wedding was small, held in a community garden in Pilsen, surrounded by friends, Aisha, and a few of Caleb's colleagues who'd stood by him. I wore a tailored suit, my camera slung over my shoulder even on my wedding day. Caleb looked sharp in his, his badge tucked away for once, his smile brighter than the summer sun. As we exchanged vows, I felt the weight of the past year, the park, the precinct, the brick through our window, but also the strength we'd built together. "I promise to fight for you," Caleb said, his voice steady. "And for us, every day. I promise to capture our story," I replied, "and to love you through it all." The crowd cheered as we kissed, and for a moment the world felt right. Aisha snapped photos, her laughter ringing out. The journalist from the gallery was there, her article now published, bringing more attention to my work. The bias training at the precinct had started, slow but steady, and Caleb was leading the charge. But the real victory wasn't in the headlines or the policies. It was in the kids who came to my exhibits, the ones who saw themselves in my photos and felt less alone. It was in the couples who held hands a little tighter, unafraid because we'd shown them it was possible. It was in Caleb and me, standing together, refusing to be broken. Months later, we walked through the same park where it all began. The bench was still there. Love is love, faded but defiant. No cops approached us this time, but I knew they could. The world hadn't changed enough, not yet. But we had. Caleb squeezed my hand, his ring pressing against mine. "Ready for the next fight?" he asked, his eyes sparkling. I grinned, my camera around my neck, ready to capture whatever came next. Always. Our story wasn't over. It was just beginning. A testament to love, resilience, and the power of standing tall, hand in hand, against a world that sometimes tried to tear us apart. And as we walked into the sunset, I knew we'd keep fighting, keep loving, keep living, no matter what.